Okay, now we're moving on to chapter 45, and we're going to talk about communities. We learned in the last chapter that all the populations that live in the same environment and interact with each other make up a community. And it's really hard to see where one community ends and another begins. We also are going to look at species composition or species richness, all the various species that live in the community. So when we talk about diversity, we're including both the species richness and the abundance of the different species. Also, last chapter, we learned what a habitat was. We said that's the address where the organism lives and reproduces. Now we're going to talk about the ecological niche, which is the role the species plays in its community. Its job or profession, what it does to stay alive. And this includes its habitat as well as its interactions with other organisms. What resources it uses, how it survives. There are two different types of niches that are distinguished because they're affected by abiotic factors. The first is the fundamental niche. This is all the abiotic conditions under which the organism can survive. And then the realized niche is the set of conditions under which it actually exists in nature. The fundamental niche is going to be bigger than the realized niche is. And here are some niches of some water birds that wade along the shore. You see the flamingos, how they'll stick their head down in the water and they use their bills and their powerful tongues to strain things out of that water. And then you've got the dabbing ducks that will tip their tail up and they feed on aquatic plants and seeds and snails. And then the avocets, they use a sweeping motion with their bills from side to side in the shallow water to get seeds and small invertebrates. The oyster catchers will use their knife-like bills to open bivalve shells. And then the plovers will dart around on the beaches and in the grasses and hunt for insects and small invertebrates. They all live along the shore, but they have different niches, different things, jobs, different ways that they stay alive, things that they have to do to stay alive. Now, competition, we talked about some in the last chapter. This is when two species compete, and it can negatively impact both species, the population of both species. Now, predation or predator-prey relationships, we've got predation. It's the predator eats the prey. And so you see more predators than you do prey. Eventually, it reduces the abundance of the prey. Parasitism is considered a type of predation where the prey harms by eating or feeding off of the host, the predator harms and feeds off of the prey. So we're going to see, because of that, an increase in the predators or the parasites. Competition occurs when members of different species require the same resource and the supply of the resource is limited. They can't both deplete that, they will deplete that resource if they both need the same resource. There's something called the competitive exclusion principle you need to be familiar with that states that no two species can indefinitely occupy the same niche at the same time. You've got all these different populations of birds that live in this tree. Some of them live near the bottom, some of them live near the top, some of them live along the sides, some of them live in the middle. They can't occupy the same niche and feed and stay alive by occupying the same niche because you will deplete the resources too quickly. Resource partitioning is the appropriation of resources in order to decrease competition between the species. And it leads to niche specialization, and there's less overlap of the niches between the species. Owls and hawks use resource partitioning and niche specialization so that their niches don't overlap. Predation, as we said, is one organism. The predator feeds on the prey. The predator is going to be larger. It's going to have a lower reproductive rate, and it's usually going to consume the entire prey. So predators decrease prey densities, and vice versa. Predator and prey populations fluctuate in size. They don't always stay the same. If the predator population increases, the prey population decreases. So they're dependent. The predator population is dependent on an increase in the prey population. There's going to be peaks and valleys. It's not going to be just a steady incline. The examples, the snowshoe hare and the Canadian lynx. But the lynx is not the only factor involved in this. If we look at this graph, you can see the hare is the magenta and the lynx is the blue. So you can see, look at 1865. You had a large hare population, a large prey population. So what happened to the lynx population, to the predator population? It went up. And you see this all along. Look at 1885. Same thing happened. More hares, more prey, more predators. And you see this happening, and you see how it's fluctuating. It's not steady all the time. Now, preys have defenses or mechanisms that keep them from being eaten by their predators. They have heightened senses, they have speed, sometimes protective armor, or spines or thorns. Sometimes their tails or other appendages will break off. They will produce poisonous chemicals. They'll use camouflage or warning coloration like the poison arrow frog does, or flocking behaviors. And this is showing some examples of those. You've got camouflage there. It's hard to even see that organism that's there because it's so camouflaged with the environment. And then the warning coloration of the poison arrow frog. And then if you look in the last picture, that animal has a false head, and so it scares other animals, and that is a defense. That in figure A, that camouflage, that's a flounder. They also will use mimicry, where one species resembles another that has an overt anti-predator defense, and so it fools other organisms. Batesian mimicry is like that flower fly and the longhorn beetle. The beetle lacks the defense, but the flower fly has it. So, and another example is the scarlet king snake. It mimics the coral snake that's venomous. Mullerian mimicry, it shares the protective defense with the other species, like a bumblebee and a yellow jacket. They both can sting, so it shares that defense.